Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office. But don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not.
Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it, not from a massively fun or action-packed podcast about our life experiences.
I want to take a quick moment to talk about an upcoming webinar that the Tourette Association of America is having. The Tourette Association of America does regular adult webinars. The August webinar will be on Monday, August 26th, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. This month's title is Reducing Upper Body Tick Pain, Self-Massage and Movement Strategies. Two experts will be teaming up that I had the wonderful opportunity to meet at TickCon. But in case you missed it, you'll be able to see them and attend the webinar. Katie Podaradsky is a structural massage therapist and an online educator. She will lead you in self-massage techniques and targeted stretches for the neck to specifically alleviate muscular tension caused by neck motor tics, which is very helpful. You will also understand some perpetuating factors of neck tension so you can make lifestyle adjustments.
Raquel Cunningham, a personal trainer with Tourette Syndrome, will teach us how identifying the what and the how behind the muscles and joints we tick with allow a strategic selection of exercises to address the effect of tics on our bodies. The spotlight will be on the upper body chain, prioritizing postural muscles, offering practical insights tailored to ticking bodies. To sign up for that webinar, go to tourette.org. Again, that webinar is Monday, August 26th, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. If you miss it, you can watch the recording after the event on their site.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Tourette Podcast. My name is Jhonelle.
And I am Britney. And today we are here with Kel, who is a military veteran with Tourette Syndrome. Kel, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having me. This is cool.
Of course. Yes, we're happy to have you. Can you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so I, let's see. I was in the Airforce for 23 years. I was actually commissioned on Friday, the 13th of August, 1999. And, I was planning to do my 4 years and get out, and then 23 years later I finally did.
Wow.
Along the way I met my beautiful wife, and we have 5 children, and
Wow.
we're now in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia. So
Man,
Okay.
5 kids. Whew.
yeah.
That's okay. Do you mind telling us, I guess, because everybody's story with dealing with Tourette syndrome is different in terms of when it first started or when they were diagnosed. What is your story behind when you first got tics and
So
how you dealt with
yeah,
that?
so I think we first noticed my tics probably around 2nd or 3rd grade. And at first it was, my parents were asking me, "Hey, why are you laughing like that?" And I didn't know. I was like, I'm just laughing normally. This is how I laugh. And they're like, no, that's not how you laugh. And from there, it kind of escalated over, I would say, until like early to mid part of high school. I started to develop more motor tics and different verbal tics, and there were points at which I would say like whole words, and it's kind of awkward, especially growing up, being a kid in a little town where everybody knows everybody, and Tourette's wasn't a common thing to know about in the 1980s, and I actually I wasn't officially diagnosed until I was about to graduate from college.
Oh,
I
Okay.
so when I was in high school, senior year of high school, I decided to join Airforce ROTC, which is like when you're in college, you train to be an officer, And so I had to go through like a physical for that and everything, and I was able to make it through that just fine. But when I got to the end of college, they did like they call it a pre-commissioning physical, like one last check to make sure everything's good to go. And it was at that point they said, we really ought to have you checked out by a neurologist to see if this is going to limit you. And so
okay.
I had to wait a couple of months to get seen. And so I
Yep.
was having like mixed feelings about, what if they say no? I kind of had a plan going here. And
Right.
but saw the neurologist. I described my symptoms. I had a pretty good feeling at that point that I had read enough to say that this sounds a lot like Tourette's, but he was the one that actually confirmed it, and gave me. I finally had words to say, yes, I have Tourette's, and I can go from there. But yeah, like I said, I went into the military. I studied civil engineering in college, and was a civil engineer in the Airforce. And so I did like base maintenance and environmental compliance stuff and that sort of thing. But I was in Florida for about 3 years, and then I went up to Greenland for a year, which was
Oh, wow.
pretty awesome.
Oh, wow.
And then I came back down to Florida because I wanted to go to explosive ordnance disposal school. And I guess I should explain
Yeah, I was going to say,
That sounds
what is
intense.
yeah. So in the Air Force, under the civil engineer squadron, you have like those functions I talked about where you have like the design and construction and the running the base and all that. But you also have some emergency services, and like the fire department falls under us, and like the emergency management falls under us, and the EOD, the bomb squad, falls under the engineers. And so, when I was at my first assignment, the EOD folks were, they were just cool, and I wanted to hang out with them. And as I hung out with them, I wanted to, be one of them. And so I applied, and I got I got my assignment officer to send me to the school, and that's all well and good. But then I was worried because, what if I can't do this because I have Tourette's?
Yeah.
And so I was nervous about that. And then I got to the school, and they're checking me in and doing all the, going through and getting me like registered and assigned and everything. And the last stop was the medical office. And so I had to go in and give them my medical record, and they had a questionnaire they had me fill out, and they go through everything, and they say, okay, anything else you want to tell us? And I, well, I have Tourette syndrome. Is that a problem? And the guy looks at his list. He's like, well, it's not on the list, so I think you're good. Then sent me on. I'm like, okay. And
That's
yeah.
cool.
But yeah, so I learned to blow things up. I learned to make things not blow up. All of that. And yeah, so
Were you ever in any of like the high pressure situations? Like I'm of course picturing like a scene where you like have to cut the one wire now. Like, is that real?
I never had to cut a wire in real life.
Okay.
So I deployed to Iraq for 6 months, and I deployed to Afghanistan for, God, I lose track. I deployed to Afghanistan 3 times for 6 months each. And the first one to Iraq, first one to Afghanistan, that was when I was working as EOD. And so I actually did go out on missions with some of the teams, and we did have to like set things up so that we could take care of this thing. But a lot of the stuff that we do, we try to do remotely, like with robots or with other
Oh,
things that will keep us out of harm's way. Doesn't always work out that way, but our first choice is we want to be far away from the danger when we're taking
Yeah.
care of it.
yeah. That makes
And
sense.
so we did do some of those things, and then back when I was at Dover, we actually had a lot of missions off base because at the time people would find like old grenades and old military shells that were either dredged up from the sea or just left in the woods somewhere. And so we would have to go out and identify it and figure out if it was dangerous, and then if we needed to, we'd bring it back and destroy it so it couldn't hurt anyone. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
some of those were kind of fun.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about that, having to like make sure old stuff is fine, or even stuff that gets washed up to sea or whatever. That's crazy.
Yeah, it was an
Yeah.
interesting 3 years, but after that I wound up going. I needed to go to a new assignment, and I wanted to be an instructor, and so I applied and interviewed to be an instructor at the Airforce Civil Engineer School, and they accepted me. And so
Nice.
I went, and for 3 years I was an instructor teaching other engineers how to be engineers in the Air Force. And I also taught them about what EOD did, and like how to lead that part of the unit. And um, what was actually really cool, at one point, we had a new class of brand new officers coming in, and all the instructors got up and we were introducing ourselves to them. And whoever it was that was running that class, they said, "Okay, I want you to get up, introduce yourself, and tell an embarrassing story." And so I got up, and I don't know if you'll be able to keep this in the podcast, but we'll try.
Okay.
So I got up and I introduced myself like, "Hello, I'm Major Hannum. I'm a civil engineer and EOD officer, and my embarrassing story." Well, first I told him I had Tourette's and explained what that was. And I said, "That's not the embarrassing part. I'm not going to be embarrassed about that. What I am embarrassed about is this one time I was at my EOD unit, and one of my tics at the time, I kind of like tapped myself rather forcefully in the leg.
Yeah.
And one time I was talking with one of my airmen, and I was doing that, and I missed my leg and hit myself in the groin.
Oh no.
Oh no.
In mid-sentence. And he's like, "Sir, are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine."
Oh man.
So I
That's
went back to my office. I'm like, I'm gonna sit down for a bit. You keep doing what you're doing. But so I told that story in front of the class, and then when they went on break, one of these guys, one of these young officers came up to me and he said, "Sir, do you really have Tourette's?" I'm like, yes, I do. And he's like, "Well, so do I."
Oh, wow.
And so like, whoa. And so
Yeah.
we got to talking, and I think I had known about the Tourette's Association before that, but I learned a lot more about it from him, because when he was growing up, his mother was very involved in it, and
Yeah.
getting to know or trying to find support for him. And so that kind of led me to find out what the Tourette's Association was doing in our area, and I actually started going to an adult support group for Tourette's.
Nice.
And it was really interesting for me because I didn't know a lot about Tourette's, and I'd never really talked to people that had dealt with Tourette's before. It, and I remember sitting in these meetings and talking with folks, and they would say, well, I did this, and then I had this tic, and I felt this way. And I remember going, wait a minute, that's Tourette's? Oh, that explains so much.
Yeah. Like identifying with a lot of stuff people were saying.
Yes. And I remember when I got diagnosed, the neurologist asked if I had intrusive thoughts, and thinking, well, what's an intrusive thought? I don't know what that is, so I'm going to say no.
Yeah.
And then hearing them talk about what that meant, I'm like, oh, yes. Yes, I do have that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's crazy.
I love that you were able to, find some common ground with other people and, hear other people's stories to help you out. And then now you're here telling your story to help other people out.
Yeah,
I love that.
absolutely. And probably inspiring some people that might be afraid to go into the military because they're afraid that they'll get turned down because of their Tourette syndrome.
Yeah.
And just the fact, too, you're also spreading the message about how empowering it can be to be around people with Tourette syndrome, because I'm still learning from other people with Tourette syndrome all the time. Like, I've learned different types of names for certain tics that I have. And like, I didn't know like Tourettic OCD was a thing until like a couple years ago. Like, I've always had it, but I didn't realize like that's kind of what it was.
Yeah.
So you just always learn from other people, I feel like, and I keep learning things. I think I learned from you, Jhonelle, like, what was it? Like a dynamic or a fluid disability.
Oh, like dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never heard that term until you said it before. So always learning, even when you have it yourself.
Yeah.
For sure. That's true.
And I'll say this, and I'm always first off, one of the reasons I like this podcast is I'm actually hearing people talk about Tourette's, and it's not like a clinical thing. It's experiences. It's what we're actually going through, and just being able to hear from other people and go, oh yeah, okay, I can relate to that, and just so one thing I do want to say is I'm always worried when I talk about my Tourette's and my experiences, that I'm worried that I make it sound like it was easy, and it wasn't always.
Right.
Of course.
No, I have those same worries when I talk, because I try to like keep a positive attitude, and I fear that people get the wrong idea.
Yeah.
So what kind of leading off of that, what kind of struggles or
like challenges?
Yes, thank you. Were present, especially like in your life in the Airforce and stuff. Like, what kind of challenges did your tics and stuff present for you?
So one thing that was always important to me, I was in the Air Force, for basically all of the Afghanistan conflict and all of the Iraq operations. And I was always concerned that I did not want to be the guy who was in the military but could not deploy and do my part in those types of things, in those operations. And so I always tried to go and talk with the medical folks, especially when a deployment was coming up, and say, hey, am I going to be okay for this? Do I need to see someone who can document that I'm okay to go and do this thing. And what was funny, I had 2 deployments as EOD, and I had 2 deployments as more of a standard engineer. And I actually had more trouble deploying as an engineer than I did as EOD.
Wow. Interesting.
At one point, I'm going in for my final medical clearance for my 3rd deployment. I'm going to be like an engineer in one of the less dangerous places. And they're looking through my record and they're like, wait a minute, you have Tourette syndrome? I think we have to do a medical evaluation board on you. I'm like, no, you don't. No, I've done this before. It's okay. And so kind of dealing with that. At one point I was on a deployment and someone asked me or I was being seen at the clinic, and one of the providers discovered I had Tourette's and was on some medication for it, and they're like, "You shouldn't be here. Like, you shouldn't have been let into the country. How are you here? We need to send you home." And at which point my boss was like, "No, you're not going home. He's not going home.
Yeah.
We have him." And so,
Wow.
but it just and again, I was an engineer there. I was reviewing planning documents, and I was
Yeah.
laying out where buildings needed to go. I this time I wasn't going out and cutting the
Right.
red wire, so to
Bomb
speak.
squad
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But
Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting to me because, yeah, it feels like if you were to face any, I don't want to say discrimination, but troubles in that
Animosity.
sense from other people, it would have been the other group, not you as an engineer. So that is interesting.
no, honestly, the EOD folks were really accepting of me, and I think I approached it with some humor. I would explain it to them, but I invited them to laugh with me instead of at me, and just make sure that they understood, and if I could educate them on something, do that, but also still have a sense of humor about it. And
Yeah.
I think that really helped. And
Yeah.
so
I think it's important. Jhonelle and I talked about this a couple episodes ago about laughing with us and not at us. And because sometimes, I think sometimes it is important as a person with something like this that you are able to be lighthearted about it from time to time. It makes it a little bit easier. But there's a huge, huge difference in somebody laughing at me for my tics than with me.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's also different when even people when like if I sit here and I joke around with you guys about it, like that's even can be a little bit different. So, but it can be very different. But I'm glad they were accepting. Did you run into, obviously the people with the engineering side of things had the wrong idea, but
well,
anybody else that thought like
it to be fair, it actually wasn't the engineers. It was like more on the medical side.
Oh, okay.
The medical providers didn't really know what to make of me.
That's
Gotcha.
concerning and a little frustrating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, we could go down some rabbit holes on that, but I'm yeah.
Yeah.
So I found I had to kind of deal with that from time to time. Honestly, I think some of the bigger challenges I faced personally was, I think I got to a place of acceptance with my tics, and when someone would notice and ask me about it, I could explain it to them. And I think my rank had something to do with it, because if someone by this point, I'm a major or I'm a lieutenant colonel, and there are fewer people that I'm running into on a daily basis that outrank me. That so they're kind of asking with a little bit of, "Sir, are you okay?" And
Yeah.
I could kind of talk with them from from that place, and I think that helped me. If when I was younger, when I didn't have the rank, maybe I felt a little less confident in my ability
Yeah.
to do that. But I think personally, the thing that was more challenging for me were some of the co-occurring things that come along with Tourette's.
Yeah.
I dealt with anxiety for a long time,
Mhm.
and I sought counseling at various times during my career because I needed that to help me function
Yeah.
better.
Yep.
And uh, I think that's one thing that in the military they've really tried over the last 20 years or so to destigmatize seeking mental health
Mhm.
Yeah.
help.
Yeah.
Still have a long ways to go, but just the fact that you could go see a counselor and not have it affect your career. Um, that's a major improvement from say 50 years ago,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
even 30 or 20, 30 years ago. It might have had more of an effect, but as more and more people came back from Iraq and Afghanistan and were dealing with what they had seen and the experiences that they had had, I think the leadership realized that, hey, we've got to let people go and get taken care of in this way. And
Yeah.
I appreciate I appreciate that. I was actually diagnosed with post traumatic stress disorder. Um,
Mhm.
Again, it was only a few years ago that I was diagnosed with PTSD.
Oh wow.
Um, but once I started talking with counselors about what I was experiencing and what my symptoms were, I started to realize
Yeah.
more and more that, oh, that could be explained by PTSD. And
Yeah.
and
Right.
I I I've actually avoided that diagnosis for a long time, um, because imposter syndrome. I felt like
Mhm.
I
Mm.
didn't deserve that diagnosis. Like,
Yeah.
without getting into where my diagnosis came
Mhm.
from, I wasn't in this big firefight that you see in the war
Yeah.
Right.
movies. Um, but when I finally opened up and started talking about some of these things, the counselors were like, that's valid. Your feelings are
Yes.
Mhm.
valid.
Mhm.
Um, so kind of accepting that and learning to live with that um, has been has been a big change over the last few years, and I
Yeah.
feel like I'm better. I still have a long way to go, but I feel like I'm better for accepting that and starting to deal with it versus
Yeah.
ignoring it.
Yeah.
I think it's really
For sure.
powerful and important too that you're bringing up that you're going and you're getting the help and working on it and going to therapy because, as you said, I'm sure it was even more stigmatized for men in the military. But I feel like even now with men in general, it's stigmatized for men to go see a therapist and
Mhm.
get help when they need help. And so I think it's really important that you're bringing that up because it's not a bad thing to need to go see a therapist. It's not a bad thing to
Right.
go to therapy. It's actually
Yeah.
the stronger choice to go, I think, to admit that you need the
Yeah.
help and everything. Like, I know at first when I started seeing it, when I tried, was like, I'll say dabbling in trying to see a therapist. Um, I didn't really tell a lot of people except like my husband knew, obviously. But when I started going last year, I was just very open and honest about it. Like before, I'd be like, no, I can't go do that. I have plans. I have to do something. Where last year when I started going, I'm like, no, I have to go to therapy. Like I have a therapy appointment and I can't miss it. It's very important.
Yeah.
So, and I think it goes back to, for me too, with how I talk about my Tourette syndrome, especially with people who are new to it or new to my life, whatever. I try to make it as casual as I can, because then I've noticed that they take it more casually as well. Where I'm like, yeah, well, I have to go to my appointment, or yeah, I have tics and this is kind of what I do sometimes. No big deal. And I kind of wave it off depending on if they're asking questions or not. But
Right.
I've noticed that they accept it a little more. They might still say some unfortunate things at the beginning or whatever, but
right.
they're willing to learn more, I've noticed, if I'm more casual about it, I guess.
Yeah, I think so too. And I definitely relate with you, Kel, on you talking about, you know, the imposter syndrome feeling of it, because I also have PTSD and have been going to counseling for, I don't even know, too many years. Too many. Too many to count. And yeah, it is, like you said, kind of one of those things where you're like, I don't really know this. Like, I don't feel like I should be having this when other people have had it worse.
Yeah.
That's definitely a thing. I know it's not, like, PTSD is not necessarily a co-occurring condition because of Tourette syndrome, but I feel like I do know several people that have both PTSD and Tourette syndrome. I'm curious to know for you, and I can share as well, what do you find that your tics either interact or don't interact with any PTSD symptoms, or do they interact with each other, vice versa?
It's, I kind of feel like I've got it's such a jumble of co-occurring conditions that I think we all deal with, that it's hard for me to pinpoint, is this because of the PTSD?
Yeah.
Is this because of the anxiety? Is this because of the Tourette's? Is this a normal reaction to a stressful situation?
Right.
And,
That too.
kind of finding my way through that, and just kind of taking a breath and saying, okay, I need to, let's think about how I'm dealing with this, and going into that. Yeah. One thing that I have noticed, and I don't know if this is typical or if other people experience this, but it kind of relates back to the intrusive thoughts thing. And I will, every once in a while, this like thought will pop into my head of some embarrassing thing that I did 20 years ago, or however
Yeah.
long ago. And when it does, without thinking, I blurt out something. And it's usually something, thankfully, it's something like, okay, embarrassing thought. I love my wife and kids. What? Like, well, if I've got to say something, I think that's a good thing. But
Yeah.
especially when my wife hears me and she's like, that was a tic, wasn't it? And I'm like, yes, but I mean it.
I love that. Yeah, no, I was curious to know, because I feel like for me, when I'm having, specifically more so like flashbacks or episodes with my PTSD, I actually don't tic, which to people that, typically would assume like, oh yay, that's a great thing, like you don't tic, happy, but like no, like it's because my body literally freezes and I cannot move or cannot speak, so neither do the tics. So yeah, I was just curious if that was a thing, or if you were, in a situation where you're more stressed or more anxious, and then you noticed you ticked a lot or anything like that.
So something I thought was interesting, and this, it goes back to being able to function on the bomb squad and being an instructor. What I found is that when I'm, maybe stressed is not the right word, but I have to focus on something. Like there is a there's a problem in front of me, or there's a class full of people and I have
Yeah.
to tell them something that they need to learn. Um, or even just talking to you right now and figuring out what word needs to come next, I don't tick.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
when I relax a little bit and I'm, now I'm listening to the students, or I'm listening to you and what you're saying. That's when I tick and it comes out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah. That's why my tics come out a lot when I lay down to go to bed. Because my
Yes.
body is like relaxing, and it's like my tics are like anything that you didn't do today. We're about to let it happen.
Yeah. I feel that. I was watching this sounds a little pretentious, but I promise you that was not it. I was watching one of our more recent episodes with a friend that had come over. Number one, because she wanted to see it. Number two, because I did not edit that video, so I didn't really see the full product. So I was like, oh yeah, what did we talk about? So we put it on. And I noticed, which I've noticed for several videos, but so did my friend, noticed that she'd be like, oh, you don't really seem like you're taking a bunch. And it was always when I was talking. But then when you would start talking, then I would start ticking. And then when I would start talking, you start ticking. It's the same thing. Like when I'm focused on what I'm trying to say, try to make things concise, or I need to expand on what I mean, and I'm thinking and focused, then I'm not really ticking as much. But it's when I'm listening to somebody else, that's when I'm ticking and, have even like situational ticks. Apparently the past couple episodes, my ticks have loved for either my chin or my nose or my forehead to tap the mic, and I'm just like, ugh, like lean back. Like, oh yeah. But it usually happens when I'm not talking. So I feel that.
So don't know why this popped into my head right now, but one of my ticks,
That's fine.
I roll my eyes.
Same.
My wife did not
Yeah.
realize that was one of my ticks
For
like a year.
She thought you were just giving her an attitude.
Yes.
She let it go for a year?
Oh.
Well, to be fair, I was deployed for 6 months of that time, but
okay.
But yeah, one point she's like, "Don't you roll your eyes at me?" I'm like, "I'm not rolling my eyes at you. It's a tick." "No, it's not."
No.
Yes, it is. "Oh, okay." She has the patience of a saint. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So does my husband.
That's awesome.
Yeah. My eye rolling tick has gotten me in trouble. When I used to work at a restaurant, a customer complained to my boss and said that I was a host. And they complained to my manager and said that I put the menus down and rolled my eyes when I walked away. I'm like, well, yes, I did, but I can't help it.
Not on purpose. Yeah.
And I remember looking at them like, believe me, if it was on purpose, they would have known.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this face doesn't lie.
Yeah.
So,
right.
But yeah, it
That's
got me in
true.
trouble there. Or sometimes I get nervous that people are going to think I'm doing it. And sometimes like I'll stop somebody, like I'll interrupt them if my facial tics are going. I'm like, I just need you, like I'm ticking. I'm not rolling my eyes at you. I'm not like making fun of you. Like I'm just ticking, but continue. Like I just feel like I have to put a disclaimer out there. I wish it's like I need one of those digital signs that go across my chest, like may tick with eyes, not rolling.
Yeah. May make funny faces, but not at you, not on purpose.
If I'm working on a project and I'm going to be working with someone for an extended period of time, or I'm going to be in meetings with them, I do make it a point to talk about my tics and say, hey, my eye rolling tick, that's me, that's not you. But
yeah, it can be, depending on the day, it can be really tiring to have to feel like you have to do that. Like there's just certain days where I'm like, I really just wish I didn't feel like I had to explain myself all the time. And I am at a point where I'm pretty accepting of my Tourette syndrome. And don't get me wrong, there's, like you said, I don't want to make it sound like it's been easy peasy my whole life. But there have been bad days.
There are days.
Yeah. Last year, I was in a very bad place with my tics, mental health, everything. And it's when I started going to see a therapist. My doctor made me, but he was correct. But, oh my goodness. I don't know what I was going to say. This happened the other day. See? It's been a long day.
It's okay.
Oh,
you were talking about...
Yeah, it gets tiring just to feel like I still have to like tell people sometimes. And I don't know. But at the same time, I like to tell people because I'd rather them know. So then I feel a little more I don't know. It's just like this double-edged sword sometimes, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Or, you don't want to like have that be the first thing you say to someone, like, "Hi, I'm
Right.
Kel and I have Tourette's."
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
at some
So
point, like, if this is we're gonna be talking for a while, I should probably let you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you with that, going off of that too, now when you met your wife, was this after diagnosis? Was this during diagnosis? How was that telling her and her accepting of that? Because you said she has the patience of a saint, so I'm assuming it went very well, but I'm
Yes.
interested.
So, so it was after diagnosis. It was a few years after diagnosis, and I met her online.
Okay.
And
Nice.
it's funny now because people will ask, "Oh, they had online dating back then?" Like, yes, not that
Come
old.
on.
But so we met online. We talked online for a bit. We talked on the phone for a bit. We had our first date, and then on our second date, we went to a movie, and she noticed that I was doing like kind of the throat clearing tick, and she thought, "Oh, well, maybe you need some water or something." And so, just kind of like was trying to be helpful. But
Yeah.
I think it was after that that I told her that, just so I have Tourette's and this is what it is. And it at that point, "Oh, okay. So was that what you were doing during the movie?" Like, yes, that's what it was. And so, yeah, I think by that point she thought I was worth some time investment. And so,
Yeah, that's awesome. So now, if you don't mind me asking, have any of your kids developed any type of tics or anything like that?
Not that we've noticed.
Okay.
My oldest is 18. My youngest is 6.
Oh,
And
wow.
they're
Okay.
they're fairly evenly
Yeah.
spaced. And I'm kind of keeping an eye on my youngest too, because so far we haven't seen anything. But
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I'm careful about as a parent is that I know what it's like to go undiagnosed for a long time, and
Yeah.
I don't want my kids to have to deal with that. So if they come to me and say, I'm noticing this and I'm concerned, I'm like, okay, well,
Right.
let's see who we can go to see what that might be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I my parents were great, and it was just a different time, and medical resources were different. But
Yeah.
you know where I am now, I want to make sure that my kids have the ability to, put a word or put a name to what
Yes.
they're
Yeah.
experiencing. And even if that doesn't mean there's a treatment for it, they at least can say, this is what this is, or I can
Yeah.
learn more about this. And so,
Yeah.
And have somebody else that they can at least they that knows that has it, because then it kind of seems like they're not the only one. They're
Right.
not
right.
standing out like, oh yeah, my dad has that too.
Yeah.
So kind of, I don't know, it's different.
And
And then of course with you, getting diagnosed later in life and not really, I guess, having that word for it until later, then that definitely is something that can help you with if any of your children end up, having tics or anything like that.
Yeah.
Be able to, share your story.
Yeah.
I have a question for both of you because you were both diagnosed later in life. Question for like how you would approach, because you hear sometimes, not necessarily about Tourette syndrome, about anything, with parents and because I really like what you said, that you want them to be able to have a name for what it is.
Mhm.
Where you hear parents sometimes where they get scared about the label or the diagnosis defining them because of the diagnosis. What would you say for those fears? Because of like, do you think it would have made, what kind of difference do you think it would have made for you to know, like, to have that answer for you growing up if you could have just put that name to it?
Huh.
That might be a deeper, harder question than I anticipated it being. Sorry.
That's okay.
No. On the one hand, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't, going through school, I didn't have an IEP, or I didn't have any of those kinds of resources that are maybe available to students today. And maybe that would have made some things easier, or maybe I would have had teachers that
Definitely.
would have known, hey, he's not misbehaving, he's doing this because of this.
Yeah.
But it's so hard to say.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I'll Jhonelle, did you want to say anything? I don't want to take up all the time.
Yeah, sure. That's okay. I
Yeah,
mean,
you're our guest.
you're the guest for this episode, so no worries. I would say, I know, Brittany, you had mentioned, like, for parents that maybe are afraid for their child to have a diagnosis, because one of the common things is they're afraid that then they'll be bullied.
Yes.
I'm not saying they're going to get bullied either way, because I hope nobody gets bullied. But what I mean is, having a labeled diagnosis does not cause bullying.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, because you're still doing the things that gave you the
Yeah, you're
diagnosis.
still exactly.
Yeah.
If you're still twitching, you're still ticking. And kids may ask, "What are you doing?" or "Why are you doing that?" And if you don't know, you don't have a diagnosis, nobody's talked about it, you just say, "Well, I don't know."
Right.
And then you're just a weird kid that does that, and you don't know why.
Yeah.
So it's not like if you have that diagnosis now, people are gonna start bullying you because they know what it is. Like, oh, the Tourette's kid. Like, if there's not a word for it, then you might have been called something else,
Yeah.
like the twitchy kid or the glitchy kid or something.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't steer away from getting them a diagnosis just because of that, because it does, help open the doors to any types of accommodations or resources that they can use in school.
Yeah. I think sometimes they think, and now I'm not a parent, but like the way that I hear parents sometimes talk, that parents that are afraid of these types of things, is it almost seems like they think if they don't go for the diagnosis, then that means it doesn't exist, and then it'll just magically go away, and we don't have to think about it, which I think could potentially, depending on the situation, everybody's different, every situation is different, that could do more harm than good. Because I would imagine for both of you, it was relieving to put that name to why I did these things for all my life. And
Absolutely.
because I've known since I was a little kid, and I think that gives me a completely different experience than people being diagnosed later in their lives. And what we've heard, at least, or what I've heard, we just spoke to Colleen on our last recording, where they're just called, she just had some silly habits when she was growing up, or habits. She might not have said silly, but they were just habits. And I hear that a lot, or quirks is what I hear. And that's what I hear a lot from people
quirks.
when they get diagnosed later in life, because that's just what they were like written off as.
Right.
Yeah.
I called them habits when I first, when it first came about.
Yeah.
So.
And I can see it being like that,
true.
especially with how tics can tend to first present. Like, because I know I had a sniffing tic, and we didn't realize it was a sniffing tic until after I was diagnosed. And later, thinking about all of the times my grandparents yelled at me to blow my nose, they stopped. Once I found out I had Tourette syndrome, they didn't do that anymore. But if you ask my to this day, she might not remember as well, but she would feel bad to this day.
It's just something that they thought.
Yeah. And I didn't know too. Like, I went and blew my nose
like,
eventually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, because I'm like, well, why? I mean, I am sniffing, but it really doesn't feel like I have to blow my nose, but I am sniffing. So it was like this weird feeling in my brain, because I didn't know. And then sometimes too, I didn't even notice that I was sniffing. And I think because like when I'm sniffing to actually sniff, or now because I'm an adult and I recognize things in my body a little better than a child, but
Yeah.
it was just another thing that I did. And it's interesting to look back and see all of the things that, you know, were those tics. And people, they get written off because of sniffs and throat clearing. Sometimes doctors say, well, it's just allergies. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I hear that a
And
lot too.
funny enough, like, I guess, I don't know. I didn't really, okay, so I didn't fully realize that I was ticking when I was younger. However, talking to other people that knew me in elementary school, they're like, yeah, no, you always did this, you always did that, which are tics that I have today. It wasn't until I was older that, like teenage years when they kind of, you know, spikes up, that I was able to assume what it was. Like, it could be this, it could be that, you know, because then I'm Googling things through the internet.
Mhm.
But that, I guess that word you come up for, like, oh, I guess it's just this, I guess it's just that. For that concept transferred over to like symptoms of PTSD was very similar as well. Like
Mm.
before I realized that I had PTSD, it was like certain things I was doing. I'd be like, wait, why am I doing that?
Yeah.
Which was protective measures that I had developed. But when I took it and continued it out of, I guess not out of place, but out of a typical place when I went off to college, it started to be like, why do I do that? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why? And I don't know. That's just interesting as well to think. Like, I was like, I don't know. I just have these weird habits that I just want to do things a certain way. I want to avoid this. I want to do it something that way. And then it wasn't, yeah, until later. I was the person, being a psychology major, I learned that I had PTSD in psychology
Oh, wow.
class when we had abnormal psychology, which is, they call it abnormal psychology. It's really the class where they go through the diagnostic manual. And yeah, the professor, you know, would talk about something and everybody was fearful a little bit, like, I don't know, like maybe I have that. So for example, I'll give you a quick example. When we started talking about OCD, she gave some examples of what that could look like. You know, somebody prefers things symmetrical or somebody's checking. And you could see like all the students kind of worried, like, oh, I don't know, like maybe I have OCD because like I like to go back and check, did I lock my door? And then she'll give an example like, well, yeah, but it's different. Like if you
Yes.
check back to lock your door and then you start driving to work, but then you have to check back again, but that was only 2 times and you have to do it 3 times. And she would explain it and everybody would kind of collectively sigh like, oh, okay, cool. Like, no, I'm fine. When we got to the portion on PTSD, everybody's like, well, I don't know, like I'm kind of scared of dogs because that one time a dog chased after me. And then she gave the explanations to kind of make everybody feel like at ease, like, okay, cool. And my shoulders were still up. And I was like, okay,
But
cool. That, okay. I guess I'll explore that more. And then yeah, I ended up getting diagnosed with PTSD. So
I I get a little sensitive when someone's like, "Oh, I have OCD. I've got to have my desk clean." I'm like,
mhm.
"No, let me explain what my OCD was like growing
Right?
up." You know,
Yeah,
like I
yeah, it's
took this
different.
toy to school one time, and my dog died that day, so I never took that
Mm,
toy to school because I was afraid my other
yeah,
dog might die. Um, you know, but
yeah.
Yeah.
or yeah, but
Yeah, I totally get that. It's different than just people that, you know, like to have their desk tidy or like to have, you know, their colors in the rainbow order,
right.
like their, you know, something like that. It's more specific. And we definitely had a great conversation about that with Colleen as well. So
I thought about her today
definitely
because
check
we
that
were
out.
making chicken for dinner.
Yeah, you want chicken, yeah. But no, I don't know. Yeah, there's something that I realized, I guess, applies to PTSD too, depending on obviously the situation. There were certain things I did, behaviors I did that were obviously protective measures at the time, that when I, you know, continued on in life in a different stage of life and continued to do those things, I was like, I don't know, this is kind of weird. Like it was weird in a different context, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Uh, like there's not a reason to lock your door to change. Like it makes sense if you lock your door to change in a house full of people, but it doesn't make sense when you're in your dorm by yourself and you lock your door. You know, it's like, but there's nobody here. So it was like little tiny things like that. And then I was like, what?
Mhm.
And I don't know. I couldn't explain it to people. And I just thought, I don't know. It's just, this is what I like. It's just what I do. And it kind of similar with people that don't really have a name for their tic disorder until way later in life.
Right.
It's the first time I realized that parallel.
Something a parallel I was thinking about with PTSD and Tourette's and even OCD, like we were just talking about,
Mhm.
is that, we throw some of these terms around so much that, some people, they're a punchline.
Oh, a lot of
Yeah.
people.
And, then when you actually have that, that's how do you react to that? And I think a lot of it is, how are they? If, sometimes I'll look at someone and they'll say something about PTSD, and
Mhm.
I'll just think, well, you know what? You're not really worth my time. You're not going to get it even if I explain it to you.
Yeah.
But then there are others that don't realize, and that you maybe want to do, they want to do the right thing. They want
Right.
to be a good person, and
Yeah.
you
They
can
want to
kind
learn
of,
from and learn to say the right things moving forward and stuff like that.
Mhm.
right. So, just kind of figuring out who you're dealing with, and whether you want to spend the energy or whether the energy is worth spending.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's important too, because what I always try to tell people too is like, I'm not mad necessarily that the mistake was made, that you said something wrong. My thing is how you're acting after that. Like if I tell you that and we have this conversation and then you continue to make those jokes and you continue to
Mhm.
make fun of Tourette syndrome, OCD, whatever it
Mhm.
might be, then that's when we have a problem. Like, because I'm sure that I've said
Yeah.
things
Or
that
downplay it, like, oh, it's just a joke.
right.
Mhm.
If I've said things that I shouldn't have said, I'm sure that I've learned from throughout the years and everything else. Like I'm not
Right.
perfect. I've learned things, but it's the way that people react and correct it, I think. But what's funny is that when I was dating my husband, we went out to dinner with friends of ours and, friends of his and his girlfriend at the time, but not anymore. He's married to a different lovely girl now. But we were out to dinner and the waitress or waiter or whatever, server went by and he made a joke about something of like, does she have Tourette's or something like that? But the way he said it, like I thought he said it, like I thought maybe Scott told him, like,
Mhm.
like the way he said it. And like I looked at Scott and we were
Yeah.
both quiet and he's like, what? And I ended up feeling bad for him because Scott would be like, she has Tourette syndrome. He's like, no, she doesn't. I'm like, yeah, yes, I do.
Yeah.
The horror that when he felt so bad. And that's the thing, and I guarantee he probably has never said something like that again because you just don't know. And
Mhm.
I've never held it, I never held, I joke around with him sometimes. I'm like, remember that one time you made fun of me without knowing the first day you met me? But,
Mhm.
I could tell, and some of those things are kind of tells for people where, the way they react when I say, well, hey, I that's me.
Yeah.
And they actually feel bad. You can tell that they're a good person because they thought they were making a
Right.
joke, and it wasn't that bad of a joke either.
Yeah.
And we're still friends. We just went to their wedding a few months ago. This is the wedding I missed the Tourette conference for. Shout out.
Oh, yes.
But yeah, and so like I said, it's the way that they act now. And now he's supportive and he'll even comment every once in a while. He's not on social media a lot, but on some of my videos when I talk about ignorant comments, you can almost see him get angry about it. And it's really interesting how that, progressed to that, and how good that came out of it. He really learned something. But like you said, it was worth the time. But it was really weird because I was having so many thoughts go through my head. I'm like, did you tell him? And it wasn't a big deal if he did.
Mhm.
And it was just a weird, awkward silence, exchange that Scott and I had. I feel like we had a silent conversation really quickly. But he changed and he did that where I've had other people where they say something and you bring it up and they're like, well, that's not what I meant. And it's
Uh-huh.
like, okay.
Or you just can't take a joke.
Yeah,
Or,
like that.
Yeah,
and that's
something.
when I'm like, like you said, you're not worth you're not worth my breath any longer.
So I have a story along those lines when I was in college, and I hadn't officially been diagnosed at this point. Actually, maybe I had. Yeah, I think regardless, we had a fairly good idea that it was Tourette's, and I had been, learning about it. I was in a fraternity, and we had an event where we had folks coming down to, find out about the house and whether or not they wanted to join and whether we wanted them to join. And we're in this one room, and I'm, just there with a bunch of the other brothers, and I'm ticking, and this one kid looks at me and goes, "Dude, what are you doing?" And the whole room went silent. And I just looked at him. I'm like, "I have tics, or it just happens." He's, "What?
Yeah.
That's weird." And then the other guys were like, "Well, it was nice meeting you. Why don't you move along?"
Yeah.
Good for them.
Yeah,
That makes me happy.
it was like I found the right group of friends.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
It's crazy to me how people react like almost like disgusted sometimes by it. And generally I've gotten these reactions online because, people are very brave when they're on the internet. But like the things that they'll say, like, "Oh my God, like how could you possibly live with that? Blah, 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 blah." And I'm like, I mean, don't get me wrong. Some days, like, I think the same thing about myself. Like, I just can't take this anymore.
Yeah.
But, like, I'm not contagious. Like, what are you... Like, I feel like sometimes people react like you're going to... And they make the joke, "So I hope I don't get it." It's really stupid. But it's the same way sometimes people react. And
yeah.
But when people come to your defense, it's really nice. I'm like, all right, bye.
Yeah, that is awesome.
I had a really weird experience about 6 years ago. I'll just tell the story. I went in to see a medical provider because I hurt my back, and we started talking, and he, gave me Motrin for my back or whatever, which was not the right thing, but that
Yeah, it was okay.
But then we started talking. He's going through my record. He's like, "Oh, you have Tourette syndrome." I'm like, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, have you ever had an MRI?" And again, we were still talking about my back, and so I thought, "Oh, he's sending me for an MRI for my back." And then realized, no, he's sending me to get an MRI on my brain. And anyway, so I get the MRI, and he calls me up a couple weeks later. He's like, "Hey, nothing ominous, but we think we see something." And but we think it might be it's a mass, it might be a tumor, but it's probably whatever it is. But this might explain your Tourette syndrome. Like this might explain your tics, and they could go in and they could take this out, and you wouldn't have these tics anymore. And
like, "Sir, what about my back?"
Exactly, yes.
That's what I'm here for.
Well,
oh my
gosh. And in the shock of all this, I go home, I tell my wife, and I'm sitting there, I'm thinking about this. At this point, all I'm thinking about is this statement that, I could have my Tourette syndrome gone. And like, what would that be like? At this point, I'm like 40. And I'm like, I'm not saying that, I like having Tourette's, but I've had Tourette's for the majority of my life. And what would that be like if I just suddenly one day did not have it? And, it really, it was a weird thing. Like, what would you do in that situation? How much of the person I've become has been shaped because I've had to deal with this. And I've, learned to adapt, to this, but I've also learned to adapt and be, resilient in other ways and
Yeah.
um, and go on. To finish the story, I went and saw several other specialists, and they told me that in fact, no, this thing would not cause Tourette syndrome. In fact,
Yeah.
if where it was located in the brain, my symptoms would be completely different. They determined that it's fairly stable. I get an MRI on my brain every year to make sure it's not changing, but
Yeah.
at this point, it's kind of it, it's a watchful waiting. We think we're making sure it's okay,
Yeah.
but keeping an eye on it to if we have to do something someday. But for right now,
Yeah.
I just live my life, and
Yeah.
that's how we go.
Yeah. It's interesting sometimes to me when people say like, oh, that's probably why you have this. And then like in that logic, that would mean like me and Jhonelle have a mass on our brain because we
The
have
exact
Tourette
same
syndrome.
spot.
Yeah. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, and it
Yeah.
would be like so many more people would have that, or like the more ridiculous claims where people are like, oh, well, it's because you're a sinner and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, in that retrospect, every single person on planet Earth would have Tourette syndrome.
Yeah.
But,
or because you play video games.
Right.
Yeah.
Listen, if that was the case, it would be my brother that has Tourette's, not me. He played them way more than I did. And he still does.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. People will say that, I guess, I don't know if they're trying to think that's their way of helping,
Right.
or giving you an idea of something you never thought before. Kind of like, well, have you ever considered, just maybe not ticking? It feels the same to me.
Every day of my life, buddy.
Have you gone gluten-free? Maybe that would help.
Oh.
Yeah.
All the time.
Get some sleep. All of those things.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure. But no, it's been really, really awesome getting to chat with you, Kel, and hear your story. And I guess it's always nice to get to speak with somebody else, because even though there might be like similarities between your stories, like for example with us both having PTSD, getting diagnosed later in life, there's still always something that's so different that you can like learn from somebody else's experience. And I always love that aspect, talking with people.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
And I love hearing about your military experience as well, because like I said, I'm sure there's some, I don't want to say kid, but maybe kid, teenager, young adult, whatever. Some person out there,
somebody somewhere,
that is worried that that's going to stop them, or just about anything in life. And hearing that, like, well, this guy was in the military and he worked with bombs. Like, I can go fly this plane, or I can go do this thing with my Tourette's. So I'm sure you're inspiring somebody out there. And so I just want to thank you for sharing the stories and the vulnerability that you shared with us today too, because it was really nice.
My pleasure. I hope it helps. I actually have talked to some people who, when they heard that I was in the military and had Tourette's, they came to me and were asking advice and about that. But I think the thing that kind of got me through a lot of this was just realizing that I was not the one who needed to tell me no. I wasn't going to tell myself no. I was going to go in and assume that I could do something until someone else told me I couldn't do it. And then I would say, but no, really, I can do this.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about? Any last message to people out there that may be listening?
I think that was it. Just
yeah, that's good. That was awesome. Well, thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in. We, love getting to chat with other people. If you are interested in becoming a guest on the Tourette podcast or Tourette's podcast, you can email us at tourettespodcast@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to chat with you and get to know you more.
Yes.
So thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.